NCW I joined in 1972. I had been looking around to see which women's British organisation I wanted to join, having just come back from an international conference and realising I knew more about women in Africa than I did in England. And I came from NCW and I've been with it ever since. The other women's organisations, and
Yeah.
I looked at the way NCW presented itself and its ethics, its aims and objectives, and being completely non-party political, very, very democratic, very open, and that appealed to me. Oh, branch, Stanmore branch, which at that time was very strong, very positive, full of wonderful women, and that's how I became a member, because I was really approached after I made the initial contact with head office. I was approached by the chair of NCW Stanmore, who asked me to come for coffee, and from then on it was all go, 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 go. Oh, I think it was most probably something like 50 or 60. I mean, some were very elderly. I was the youngest by far, strangely enough, at that point. I mean, we're going back a long time, as you can see, 1972. But no, it was very active, very people who were, women who knew what was what. Okay, well, I mean, I was asked to help with the branch, and I did various jobs in the branch. Chairman at some point or other, I can't remember when. I mean, after a while. And I started representing the branch at head office, going up to things, which was then Sloane Square, which was terribly smart. I was quite terrified because of all these ladies in their hats at Sloane Square meetings and all that. But I soon found my way around, and it was extremely interesting. And then, of course, as things moved on and I got to know more about NCW and they knew about what I could do, I expanded my work, and conferences and local conferences, European conferences, and all that sort of thing, until, Mary Main at that point, who was, I don't know if you remember the name, she was president, wonderful person. She said to me one day, Rosalind, she said, "I've got my eye on you." I said, "Oh dear, what have I gone wrong?" She said, "No, I think you'll make a good president," which was astounding. I mean, absolutely knocked me over. But she was very encouraging and helped me to find my way, and that's how it went. I mean, there were lots of wonderful things that happened because of the opportunity of meeting so many marvelous women and men, of course, when we went to big conferences. But I suppose highlights were, when I was president. I mean, that's when it was all so exciting. And I used to represent NCW. If we had a meeting with a minister or if we were going to the House, one felt very privileged to be able to go to the House of Commons and have meetings there, which we did from time to time, or if we were pursuing some particular aim, trying to get a resolution, backed up. And also meeting with lots of other women, because as you know, one of the things that we were doing at that time was with our associate members. I'm not sure if we're doing it now, but associate members were outstanding women in fields of arts, science, media, education, parliament, whatever. If we could get them to sign up to be an associate member, we could then approach them if we needed help, or approach them for advice, or use them. It was very, very exciting and very, very sensible work. And they all were usually practically very happy to oblige and be part of the network of NCW. Yes, that was, quite a usual thing, for countries to have exchanges. I can't remember which one it was before I became president, but I know there had been one. There had been for years. In any case, when it came to my turn as president, the previous months, we had the Russian delegation over, which was always very interesting because, of course, one had to do all one could to give them a good view of what England was like. And then we were invited back during my presidency. And that was quite an amazing experience because it happened to be just at the point of glasnost, Mr. Gorbachev in charge and so on. Everything was sort of changing in Russia. But we were in Moscow, only of course for a few days, Moscow and Petersburg. But the shortage of everything, that's what struck us. There were 5 or 6 of us. I think there were 5 of us. And you had shop windows, but had just boxes in, nothing in the boxes, nothing in the shops. It was absolutely, really, I mean, the bare bones. And the only shops that had anything were what they call VIP shops, which they had for ambassadors and foreigners, and that was stacked with caviar and whiskey and goodness knows what. But we didn't have much interest to us, but except to note it. But we also had the amazing experience of being taken to, I remember one thing, I shall never get it out of my mind. It was supposed to be a medical centre, and it was about 11:30 in the morning, and we were taken to this, quote, medical centre, unquote, and actually it was an abortion centre where women popped in their lunch break, as you might say, had an abortion and popped back to work. And that was it. I mean, it's the honest truth. And we were absolutely, as you can imagine, somewhat gobsmacked. So that was one of the things. And then we had the wonderful experience. One of our party had a son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren living in Moscow. They were missionaries and they'd been in Russia for quite a few years. And we were invited to their home, which was a very, very small flat, about the 14th or 15th floor on one of those giant, blocks that they had in those days, blocks most probably still do. But we, of course, made very welcome, and it was very nice to be with them and hear about their lives. And then we had an invitation from the members of the Russian group, the Russian delegation, who had put on a most delightful evening for us. How they managed to get such a good meal together, we don't quite know, but it was a delicious supper. We had a very pleasant time in one of their homes, which, of course, was much more comfortable than this flat that we'd been to a few days before. Then we were taken overnight to St. Petersburg, and we decided it was most probably because it saved them money in a hotel. We were sleeping on the train and going to St. Petersburg, which we saw, had a tour, and so on. So, it was a very busy 5 days, allowing us enough time to get an impression of the country, to find out a bit about what was going on in their circle. They were really quite circumspect, of course, in how they spoke to us, I think, careful. And we didn't want to overstep the mark by asking too many questions because it was still difficult, very difficult out there. But that was how it was. Well, let me begin by one significant change which I haven't noted, and I think it's worth noting, and that's one of the things that I was most proud of being president, and that was that I gained charitable status for NCW. As you know, it had been in the company before, and I felt that there was no way that we would carry on and get funding and do the things we wanted to do under that heading. We had to become a registered charity, as we are now. And to get that done was my good fortune that I had contacts who were lawyers and so on who helped us, and we had it done pro bono, so it was very good. It was otherwise would have been an extremely difficult job, but that was one of the things that I was most pleased about. Otherwise, the changes that I've seen, well, we've talked about it briefly, and that is, of course, the whole structure of women's organisations. Like many organisations, even my husband's Rotary Club, I take as an example, of membership falling away, of membership not being replaced, of people not wanting to sign up to things. See, we live in a completely different world, a different atmosphere now. And particularly I find, of course, the young women I know, and I count my own family, granddaughters who are in their 40s, working women, they would never dream of signing up to a women's organisation. They're very busy, too busy with their job, too busy with their children. And I think if they signed up to anything, it would most likely be something universal or global, I don't know what. They would be supporting things, but they wouldn't be joining up like we did as members who actually worked in that organisation. And that's, I think, the biggest change, what we're facing now, from what you tell me. Well, in a way, it's what we've always done, and that is to work on causes that we think are important. And I think the idea now we should pursue is to concentrate on one, two, or three major things that are important to women generally, and maybe young women in particular. And I'm thinking, for instance, of what's happening in the social media, which to me, I mean, I read about this in the newsletter. I was pleased to see that you're doing something, but I think that what is being done by the big tech companies on social media is an utter disgrace. utterly horrific what they're allowing to go out onto the programs. And that, I think, is one of the things that we, with all the other women's organizations, should jointly be fighting against. Because then I think young women we approach, who if they could see that we were doing that sort of thing, they would they possibly would be happy to join us to help the campaign, a campaign to fight it. I mean, and it sounds impossible, but I can remember years ago, do you remember it was called ASH, when we started fighting against smoking? At that time, I came home from from the office one day. I said to my husband, I can't see that we could ever do this. But it was done. It's amazing, absolutely amazing, that it was. And so something like that. Also, I think as far as the weather, the climate, the change, the whole change of the environment and global warming. This is of enormous interest and concern to everybody, also young people and to their children. And so, what are we going to do about that? What can we do as a women's organisation which might A, attract membership and B, be of use? And how we can do that in a way is public relations. I mean, there's nothing else but trying to get the message out. And I said earlier about what we had a large group of associates. They were very important. If you look at any of the old yearbooks and you look down the list of names, you'll be pretty impressed, I think, by the names you'll see on the list. And they're now, I mean, the equivalent now, are the sort of people who we would need to have with us to help with publicity to get help the campaign. That would be my idea, Gillian. I don't know if it would work, but that would be, if I was working still in NCW, that's the sort of thing I'd be advocating. Well, it's really the same story, isn't it? Message out so people know about us. I can remember when I was looking for money in the early days when we became a charity. I mean, it's just a matter of going to people and asking them. There's nothing else to be done that's really, really positive, except getting people to get an appointment with somebody important, either in a big public company, if you know them, or in some, organization, and going and saying, can I come and talk to you about NCW? We need your help. Can you help us? And that's it. And that way, I started off by getting money from Barclays Bank, believe it or not, back in the day. And there were other ways, and of course one can apply through getting funding through, what do? You write off to different companies and, ask them for help. I think that's the only thing I can think of, Gillian. It's never easy. I'm concerned to hear about our membership being so low. I mean, people like to support things that they think are strong and going places, and that's a bit worrisome. Oh, very positively, lots of ways. Firstly, because, I mean, not necessarily on our own, of course, but generally working with other organizations. I mean, the whole issue of the status of women, how they're viewed, how can they get in the workforce, how they treated in the workforce, the equalities and so on and so forth. All that has been improved. I mean, it's still got a way to go, but it's been improved immensely. And the fact that we now have, so many women at the heads of public companies, we have women who are serving in the police force, in all sorts of public office, and all that has come about because of the work of National Council of Women and others who've constantly pushed on to say this has got to be done. And something like, for instance, wonderfully good new moves like the Carers Association. I can remember so clearly, it was during my presidency at a conference, we had a resolution from a young woman, and she spoke about her difficulties because she was a carer for her father. She herself needed to have an operation which she had put off for ages, and she had to worry about what was going to happen to her father. And we started from that afterwards talking about we need something about, support for carers. And that's when we started. I think it was this sort of seed that started the Carers Association, or whatever it's called now. But I mean, now it's well established and very important and very necessary. So those are one or two issues. But I think generally it's to say that we have made the general public more aware, or certainly government more aware, of what women can offer, what women are capable of, and what they want. I would say it made a major a major impact on me, major impact on my life, because I learnt so much. I met so many good, interesting people. I had opportunities which I wouldn't have otherwise had to see and to traveling around the country to when I used to go speaking to branches, attending conferences, as I said. And the whole ethos of National Council of Women was to strive to make things better, to strive to make life better for women, their children, but all of society, not just looking at women, but primarily the women. And the women, of course, are key, because if you're making a woman's life better, you're making their children's lives better and everything that goes with it. And that, I think, to me, was extremely rewarding. I mean, I found the whole process of being a member of NCW, and particularly when I was in the chair, extremely rewarding. You know, the great day we had was a highlight of my year or 2 years, was when we had a conference on women and health, which you may have read about at some point. I mean, 1,000 people came to the Commonwealth Institute, where we had speakers and workshops and I don't know what else, and the Princess, I can't remember which princess, but a princess did come and opened it. I mean, you know, it was a major event. And of course, that was my theme. I made my theme women and health issues. And so, you know, it was extremely, extremely rewarding for me. In 130 years, which is the time that we've been in existence, we've seen these amazing, amazing steps forward and progress. And now women, of course, are capable, and they were not given opportunities, even, you know, remembering back, you know, not going to university, not being able to do this, not being able to do that. And now they can. And that's down, I think, in part to our work. I'm very proud of it. I'd like to be optimistic. I'd like to think that we will go from strength to strength and find the people to carry it forward. But it's got to be people. I mean, it won't just happen on it's not a machine that can just run on its own. It's got to have the lifeblood of people. So that will depend on who can come into it and who will drive it and who will have the vision and keep it going. I hope it does, because it's been so wonderfully valuable. But one can't guarantee anything. The world is changing at such a rate. I sometimes think, I wonder what will be happening next week, let alone next year. You know, I think we all feel a bit like that. So I couldn't say more than that. And also, once you've been away from an organization, you know, physically away for a long time, I feel I've lost the feeling of the rhythm of the organization and how it's going on. You know, I read the note about, you know, the NGM, the annual general meeting and so on. Well, you know, in my day, it was something that we all went to, and there were hundreds of us and so on, and speakers and dinners, and, you know, so of course it's all quite different. I don't think I can really give you a proper answer to that. Firstly, my memories are full of people. And particularly, I would say, most particularly the president who came before me and the one that came after me. Before me was Eve Martin, a force, an absolute force of nature. And then after me, Liz Babbage, who sadly died much too young. Wonderful, wonderful, great friend, wonderful person. And Eve, who had been one of my mentors, who was president before me. So, you know, people like that had an effect on me, because they were so special, because they had seen things and done things, had ideas, had intelligence, had motivation, and that helped me in my work. And that has all been part and parcel of what I think of as National Council of Women. And all the women who've gone before. I don't know if you've read the book recently, Gillian, but when I was president, we had this book written. I'm sure, I don't know if people even remember it, the book about the first 100 years. If you haven't got a copy, you really must get hold of it. The first 100 years, it was written by one of my colleagues at that time, Daphne Glick, and there should be some copies in the office, or at least a copy. And if you read that, you cannot be but filled with praise for what they did, for admiration for what they did, and, you know, for respect for their efforts. And that's how I feel about the organization. I just hope that it'll be able to go on. I do hope so. I don't know how it'll be done. It'll depend on the people.